I think this question is really interesting, and we kind of framed it two ways because I think so many people look at change as being difficult, but yet sometimes change is rather easy. And so our question now is, what are some reasons why change is so difficult, and where have you found change to be effortless and simple? And so, Deb, do you want to jump in on that one first?
Sure. I think, at least for me, change is most difficult, I think, when it's forced on me. Especially as an educator in the classroom, when you have mandated changes, those are the hard ones to swallow. Those are the hard ones to take, and those are also the most resistant to most staff and changes. When staff feels more involved and more that their voice is heard and that they feel part of the growth process to get there, they are more into the buy-in of the change. Change is much easier when you are part of the process, when it's part of your vision, when it's part of your passion. And then the growth process, and your opportunity for the growth of your students is so much more. It's so much more for them, and it's also so much more for you. And so that's my take as far as from a teacher standpoint.
Anybody else want to chime in on it?
Yeah, so I guess the obvious answer is fear, right? Change is hard because there are fears that people have, especially in the classroom. And what I've noticed from teachers in the classroom is that there's been a shift now, which is very promising, where it's okay to fail. For a long time, it wasn't. They had to feel like they were in control of that room. And part of being in control of that room was having all the answers, having everything planned, and making sure everything was very purposeful. And I think that sometimes our own fear is we have to remember that we're modeling our actions to the students. So how we handle change can cause anxiety. Because if we're anxious, they're going to be anxious. And we're also going to show them that, well, I need to make sure that what I'm doing is perfect all the time, and we can't have these little mishaps. We can't have Deb's lights going out or whatever is happening here. And so I feel like fear is the biggest problem. I mean, obviously we are creatures of habit. We are routine based, and we love routines, all of us. And I feel like educators as well. I've never seen an educator without a planner, because we like to plan everything out. And we like to plan years in advance, if not months in advance, everything. So, change disrupts. And that's something that I think is hard with people. As far as what's the easiest thing for me with change, honestly, it's just taking that first step into an area that you're not familiar with. Months ago, I jumped on Twitter. I've now done a podcast. I'm now part of this great panel. There's a lot of things that you can do, and it's easier than most people think. But it's just taking that first step.
Let me ask you a question, David, because I think this is one thing that, I just listened to the last session, on the consultants talking and the SDGs, and everything was always about taking that first step. And it sounds so easy. It sounds so simple, right? Tell us about what you were feeling when you just started doing those things, when you took that first step. What were you thinking? What was going through your head? What were the struggles and the things that, and I'm not saying you did have struggles, but I'm just guessing when I start things, I know kind of what I'm telling myself, and I'm curious what you say to yourself.
Well, for me, it was the fear of letting people that I cared about down, the fear of embarrassing. I'm not nervous about embarrassing myself. I embarrass myself all the time, but it's the other people that may expect a certain thing, and me not being able to perform up to that. I put a lot of pressure on myself with that, and I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people again, it's fear. We're afraid to mess up. What helped me was, and the reason I wanted to be part of the Connected Educator Day, Appreciation Day, is because it was seeing other people put themselves in uncomfortable situations online, whether it was through Twitter or Facebook or, run rants or driving, whatever it was. I was able to find a very, very important community online that modeled that it's okay to fail at these things. They modeled constantly trying to raise the bar and do different things. And that empowered me. Casey Reeder, Stacey Rashawn, all these names out there that I saw being vulnerable either through a podcast. Deb is a prime example. She shared a story on a blog, and I was just like, wow, if she can share that story, I can share this, or I can do that. So for me, that's what got me into it. That's what got me taking that first step. And it wasn't that it was mandated from someone else. It wasn't that I thought I was going to get a book deal out of it at the end, or I had some plan to do other things. It was, if these people that I respect and admire are able to do this stuff, then why can't I? And let me at least honor the fact that I appreciate what they're doing by trying it myself.
I love that, because it's about showing our humanity. And I think that one of the things that we tend to do is fall in love with predictability. And there's been a lot of information out there or conditioning that says, you've got to manage change, where change is really a natural flow. Like the lights go off, what are you going to do? Or my computer didn't reboot this at the beginning of this. And, it's your ability to be able to look at all the bumps in the roads that come into life. And all of you play such an important role in the next generations of really helping people redefine and maybe even change the language about what change is and what fear is, because we're going on this new model of success and failure. And I would love to find out just also what you think about the responsibility that you have around the concept of change, especially in modeling it and talking about it, and what you're seeing with other generations with it.
Yes, I was going to add to that, and I think everyone's made an excellent point, and I completely agree with that. During my own experience as a teacher, and I think also closed-mindedness has a lot to do with change being difficult. The more closed the mind is, the more difficult the person would accept any kind of change, and the more open the mind is, the easier change will go through. During my teach, I remember as a newly qualified teacher, NQTs as we call them here in England, you would, straight from university, from your training, you had fresh ideas, and coming into a school, as you start your teaching, maybe there are people, teachers that have been there for maybe 20, 30 years, and you have all these fresh ideas. And because everyone habits, you're set in your ways, you always teach it the same way. Why do we need to change? This works. But being able to open the mind to new ways and new ideas always makes change easier, at least to be able to accept in the first place. And I found actually that as I progressed in my career, and I became one of those people that didn't want to listen to the newly qualified teachers. So it happens to everybody. You think, I have all this experience, I know what to do, and no one's going to come and tell me how to do it differently. But I realized that actually sitting there and having a conversation with someone that's fresh from university, from research, actually helped me a lot in my own teaching. So being open-minded makes change easier.
Yeah, I completely agree. If I can just jump in for a second too. I think that it's so important that educators interact with other educators in your own school, because there's so much change going on in your own building, but a lot of times departments are so departmentalized that they don't share information. They eat lunch only together, whatever may be happening in the school. There's a way that's been done, and then there's fear. And sometimes that fear is valid. Sometimes the fear for change is coming from the top down. if administration, if there's a problem where a teacher is teaching an AP course and they want to make a big change, and that may impact scores, which then impacts how that teacher is evaluated, that's a problem, right? We're not giving teachers enough freedom to actually take risks, to model that with the students, and then say, oh, well, how did you quantify this grade? So sometimes it's the assessment piece too that really scares teachers. I think more older teachers, tenured, because they know that numbers sometimes matter a great deal, and they're afraid how they're going to assess something that they're not familiar with. So, we talked a little bit about technology earlier. If you're introducing something with technology, immediately, sometimes their mind is not on, well, how can that enhance the lesson plan, or how can that raise student engagement or student voice, or whatever we want to say. But sometimes their mind is, oh no, how am I going to prove that I'm still accomplishing the same standards in my classroom by using something new? So I just wanted to add that out there, because I do think that's a valid fear, and leadership has to give some of that freedom back to the teachers to be able to expect them to fail forward and maybe grade students the same way, at least for a piece of the assessment.
And I have a question on that. Are teachers feeling that they have the ability to question leadership? Because that's an aspect of change as well.
I can answer that. I think it depends on where you are in the country, or where you are in the world. Because in California, we have a strong union. We are a strong union state. There's no question about it. But there are a lot of states that are right to work where their voice isn't as strong. They can't question administration as strongly as we can here. And even my union is very strong, and LA Unified, you hear many stories about them in the news, where there are other smaller unions that aren't as strong in California. So it just depends. It really depends on where you are. It also depends on which school you're in, because at the end of the day, so for example, I've been through many administrations in only 2 schools in my district, and it depends on who I'm working with at the time. I feel very lucky I'm with an administration right now who allows risk-taking and questions, and I feel very lucky because I've been in the exact opposite atmosphere before. So.
Yeah, I think, and sometimes with independent schools, it's even harder because they don't have the same state standards or state testing. So there's a lot of independent schools that are also struggling with that. Do they have enough voice? Can they do these things? So it is something that we need, maybe a topic for another day, on how we can help it, admin and faculty build stronger relationships to promote that.
It was interesting. One of our first sessions this morning was, really talking about building teams. And there was quite a few people that, were in the administration and talking about how their teacher turnover, because they work at American schools, is they have a new staff every 2 to 3 years. And so it's like there's a constant turnover of educators, and how they build that team and how they build that that trust, so that there is that ability to still achieve the common goals, but still allow for the questioning and the risk taking and all those things that kind of traditionally, and as I was listening to you guys describe what it's like in education, I'm sitting there going, this is no different than it is in corporate America, right? I mean, you want to talk about silos and departments and hierarchy and structure. I mean, you just look at any corporation in America, and it's basically built that way. And so, I think, as I start looking at, these things, it's, and I reflected back kind of on the times in my life when change has happened, and I've enjoyed it, and it's been seamless. It's always been times where it's never been forced. Nobody ever came to me and said, here's what you have to do. It was planting those seeds, kind of like you talked about, David, how you started these things. I planted seeds along the way. I fertilized them by watering them and make sure they got enough sunlight. And then over time, somebody came along and saw this beautiful plant that I grew and said, hey, would you like this? And I said, oh, sure, this sounds like it's an interesting thing to me. And I think as I look in times when I've gotten contracts, times when I've been offered jobs, times in jobs when I've been asked to change my role, it's always, for the most part, the ones I've enjoyed have been the ones where it hasn't been something that somebody said, here's what you're going to do. It's been a question, would you be interested in this because you've done this? And I think if we can create more of those types of opportunities in the workplace, in the school system, I think we will encourage that change to happen a little bit more.